Right, shall we begin? Welcome everybody to the Merton CCG governing body meeting. We have apologies for absence from Dr. Mike Greenberg and Sam Page, who's our independent nurse, and we've also got apologies from Katie Bugler. We've got no further apologies for the meeting, so the meeting is quorate. Can I remind everyone that the meeting today is being recorded, so can you remember to use your microphones when you speak so that that can be picked up? We're not expecting an alarm test today, so if the alarm does sound, you'll need to leave the room via the emergency exits, which are at the back there and through that door there, or through the main reception area. And then we do have a part 2 to the meeting, and for that we'll be moving to room C. So those are the preliminaries. I'll go then straight into the main part of the agenda. So first thing, we've got section 2, which is conflicts of interest. So we've got the register of interests, which gives the current statements of interest. Are there any updates to that, or any particular interests that we need to be made aware of for any items on the agenda today? No? Good. Oh, Marek.
Yeah, it should probably just be noted under the conflicts of interest that all of the GPs are part of PCNs. I don't think that that's actually listed there.
Okay. I mean, I think we can have that as a note for going forward, because that is the case for obviously for all our GPs. Was there a particular item on the agenda that you felt that was pertinent to, or just it was a general point? Okay, just as a general noted. Thank you. So then I will move us on to the minutes of the Part 1 meeting that was held on the 6th of November. So this is for approval for accuracy. So can we just go through them quickly, page by page, shout out if there's anything that is not accurate. So we've got the first page, which is agenda items 1 to 3, moving on 4, through section 4, section 5 on finance report and performance report, and carrying on through to the end. People happy then that they are an accurate record of the meeting? Yes, good, taken as accurate, okay. I'm not aware of any matters arising that we're not covering on the agenda. Anything people feel we need to be touching on? No? Good. Okay, so let's go straight on then to the first item, which is Chair's update, which would be verbal. I've not got anything specific to update you on, because I think it's all captured in the Managing Director's update. So James, I'll go straight on to you.
Okay, so I will talk very briefly about the other items on the Managing Director's report, apart from my HT. I wasn't at the committee in common on Monday, so I'll hand over to Sarah just to update on that in a moment. I will generally take the report as read. I think the one item I wanted to flag was around transforming diabetes care. I think this is a really a good bit of news actually on a number of areas around transforming diabetes care, and this is one of the most substantial challenges we face really as a health and care system. So you'll be aware that both locally and at South West London level, diabetes is one of our flagship programmes. It's one of the areas where we've got substantial transformation work going on, and it will be a substantial feature of our forthcoming South West London 5-year plan. We've had the 2018-19 data from the National Diabetes Audit, and that shows an improvement in the percentage of patients being managed in line with the 3 clinical standards for every borough in South West London, and also a really substantial improvement in the delivery of the 8 recommended care processes for type 2 diabetics as well, which has nearly doubled in Merton over the last 2 years. So that's really good news actually, and shows the real impact, I think, of the work that we've been doing in terms of the care that patients are receiving. Merton has been shortlisted for a Local Government Chronicle Award for the Health and Wellbeing Board-led work on Diabetes Truth, which saw Health and Wellbeing Board members engaging with people with diabetes to understand the service user perspective on diabetes care in the borough. And furthermore, the South West London Diabetes team has secured £120,000 of transformation funding specifically for the work that I'm leading with a consultant diabetologist from St George's and Director of Public Health from Sutton, looking at unwarranted variation in care for type 2 diabetics. So although we're improving as a system, there's still huge variation, not really explained by demographic factors or anything else that we can recognise. So to get some funding in for that work that we're leading on saying, well, what are the root causes of that variation and what can we do about it? That's really positive. So I just thought it would be of value to flag that to the governing body. I'm happy to take any questions or hand over to Sarah to talk about IHT.
So any questions for James on those things that he's covered up to now? No? And just to say, really great news about diabetes. We know it's really one of the biggest issues that we face, and to see us making progress, but also here to hear about the new funding coming in, I think is really welcome. So well done everyone on that, really, because I know so many of us have had a part in that. Sarah, shall I hand over to you to talk about IHT?
Yes, it's just going to be brief just to let people know. So in the Managing Director's report, this was written prior to the meeting on Monday where the 3 CCGs came together across Surrey Downs, Sutton and Merton to decide whether or not to go and talk to the public, to consult with the public about possible changes at Epsom St Helier. The committees in common, so when the 3 CCGs came together, decided that yes, it was absolutely right for us to go and talk to the public and to get their views. So we are now from today in consultation. The website is up and running. People can go on there and get information, and there will be lots of events going on across all 3 boroughs. Well, Surrey and the 2 boroughs in London. So that will be for the next 3 months until the 1st of April. That was what I was going to say, really.
Might just be worth as well flagging up some of the events that will be going on. So we've got consultation meetings, so public meetings at specific times. So some of them in the working day, some of them in the evening, and that's across Merton, Sutton, and Surrey Downs. We're also going to be doing some pop-up events in public spaces that people will be able to come to. We're doing some targeted work with particular groups. So, for example, people with learning disabilities, people from deprived communities, some of our older residents, and various other groups, so that we can make sure we really do get their views. And then there's a range of other activities, such as telephone surveys based on a selection of the population. And obviously people are able to respond through the website and phone line and various other fora. So it's quite a comprehensive range of different things, and that is set out in documentation that's available on the website. You've probably all had that. If you haven't, I would strongly encourage you to have a look at the consultation plan in some detail. Are there any questions on that? Claire?
I know there's going to be a leaflet drop in the area. Have we got any idea what sort of timescale that leaflet drop will be?
I think that's going to be out in. Can I get back to you with the exact dates, because I know it's planned as quickly as possible, and it's quite wide-ranging. So it's every household, and we've gone right out into some of the areas where I know Siobhan was particularly worried about, around Lavender Fields and others. So we're making sure it's everywhere, but I'll get back to you with the exact dates. Just I don't want to say the wrong dates to you.
I'm sure there are going to be questions from the public on IHT. What we have got is we've got a question time set aside at the end. I'm anticipating questions on it there, and I will give you time to ask questions so that we can deal with that then. I'm keen that we get through the agenda so that we do leave time for questions at the end, which I will commit to do. So let's move on through the agenda items and come back to that. Let's go straight on to moving forward together, which is the implementation update. Sarah, you're going to cover that, are you?
Yeah, so I'm going to kick off, and then Ben is going to come in and talk to you about the detail. So if you remember, we have agreed and we have been formally supported by the regulators to merge the 6 CCGs across South West London into one from the 1st of April. And the process that we agreed with the governing bodies was that today we would bring some of the formal programme papers so that we could get assurance that we have put everything in place that we need to. And we're also going to run a seminar in February for governing body members to help us to see if there's a gap analysis of anything that we may have missed, to make sure that we're all ready for the 1st 1st of April. So this won't be the last time you will get the opportunity to talk about this, but it's really important that we get the opportunity to do this in public. So I'm going to hand over to Ben, who is going to run through, not all of the detail, because you've had all of the papers, but some of that, and then James will then talk to you about the local arrangements. So we'll talk about the South West London bit first, and then James will talk about the local arrangements. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'll briefly walk you through the paper. Really happy to take questions as we go or at the end. And as Sarah says, really would like your views on whether we've missed anything of this, whether there's anywhere you'd like further information, but we could then bring back to the February seminar. So if we start with the governance update. Since the last version of the governance documents that you saw, they've since been through a legal review by our legal advisors and first review by NHS England. We received a number of comments through that, none of which were substantive. They're mainly making sure that we were in line with the various pieces of legislation and that language is consistent, etc. They've now gone back into NHS England for a second review, and I'm awaiting the next round of comments, which I hope to get in the next couple of weeks. I mean, I hope that will be the end of that review process from NHS England. We'll then get a formal letter from the London Region team to say that they are happy with the Constitution and all the documents within that. With regard to the governing body appointments, we hope to complete the appointments to the lay member position and the independent members by the end of this week, and we hope to be able to appoint to all of those posts. Which will then let us appoint to and set the dates for all of the committees that we've got under the governing body that are set out at paragraph 8 and that I hope you should be fairly familiar with. Paragraph 10 and the table below paragraph 10 was just to give you a brief overview of implementation across South West London, where we are with that. And obviously James will talk you through further where we are with implementation within Merton itself. The next section of the paper takes you through individual updates of the key work streams of the programme and provides you with a lot more detail about what we're actually delivering through the programme. So Annex A in the paper was is an intentionally high-level visual overview of what we're delivering in the programme between now and April. And Annex B provides you with a detailed, as you will have seen, line-by-line deliverable plan for the programme, and beneath that there are individual project plans for each of the work streams. Annex C is the last status report that we had for the programme, and as you will have seen shows that we're on track and we're making good progress across all of the work streams at the moment. Annex D is an attempt to show you what will be in place in the new CCG on day one, and what we will be evolving and iterating in the following months. So to ensure we have capacity to deliver everything we need to, so particularly, for example, winter and IHT and other things in the CCG, we've concentrated on what must be in place for day one and what some of the nice-to-haves would be in that. So a fairly simple example is that the inter and intranet, we will have both of the new CCG, but they will include the core content that we need to make sure that we're safe and operational, but they won't be all singing, all dancing on day one. Paragraph 17 just sets out the top 3 risks that we are dealing with across the programme. I'm not planning to go into any detail of them here, but I'm very happy to take questions on that. We then run into the individual updates from the work streams across the programme. So as you know, we launched our staff consultation around the structural changes in November. That closed on the 23rd of December. The SMT received the feedback on that earlier this week. We're just working through that, and we're going to meet as an SMT next week to finalise the structures and take into account any pieces of feedback that might be affecting that next week. The diagrams of flowcharts at Annex E attempt to set out the finance flows for the new organisations, and I'll just stop there and ask James if he'd like to say anything about that.
Yeah, so just to say on that obviously we'll be working with one ledger rather than 6 as we currently do with the 6 CCGs, but because we're committed to full delegation, what we're working out is how the money flows down and then how we report at that, both at a borough level and then place and then across South West London. So what those flows are doing are just describing how some of that will work, so you'll still see a Merton position for that. It will look a bit different, but you'll still see that Merton position. A lot of that work's been taken through the Finance Committee in common as well, so there has been some scrutiny from through that route from that and how it evolves into ICSs in the future.
Thanks, James. The next part of the paper talks you through the comms and engagement function and PPI function for the new organisation. As you will know, comms and engagement is already run on a matrix basis throughout South West London, so there won't be major changes to the way they operate. The PPI function across South West London will be changing, so we will have one lay member for PPI sitting on the governing body, and hopefully, although there are still conversations ongoing, we will have one Health Watch representative on the new governing body and one representative of the voluntary sector across South West London on the governing body as well. We then go on to just outline how the primary care function will work across South West London and a worked example of that. Unfortunately, Katie can't be here this afternoon, and primary care isn't necessarily my area of expertise, but I'm really happy to take any questions back to the team and come back to you on them if there are anything. The next section touches on quality and how that will work across South West London. I was just going to ask Julie to say a few words on that.
Yeah, so just on your previous point, we did have a primary care committee yesterday where we did a lot of talk about how the new structures might work, and that did include quality as well. From a quality point of view, it will be a central team that will work across South West London, but will be managed by the chief nurse within South West London. So we're currently doing some work on revising our approach to what we currently do in regards to the CQRGs and whether they're really fit for purpose in the new world. So there is a lot of work going on. We do very different we monitor it quite differently now depending on the need in that local area, and we will still have to take that into account. So where we feel we can do things in one area a bit more light touch, we might not do that in another area, depending on the position that we're in with them. We are doing looking at an implementation plan, so I know we're going to do more work in February on gaps and risks, but we're also looking at that now within the quality team and having a consistent a framework that we can use across so that we're working in a bit more of a consistent way. But some things will be done across South West London which will enable us to do things better at scale where at scale is appropriate. But still being very local where we need to do things locally in regards to quality monitoring. But a lot of work to do, and we are starting to look at that.
Thanks, Julie. Finally, I'll just round off the paper by giving a very brief overview of what's happening across our IT and IG functions. It's fairly high level, but there is a great amount of detail behind this that's just making sure that we have all of the necessary IT systems in place and we have the right information flows within the new organisation. So that was all I was proposing to say on the paper. I'm really happy to take any question of that, and also particularly if there's any areas that you would particularly like more information on.
Thank you very much, Ben. So we're asked to note the update, but then also to identify any areas we want to discuss further or that we need further information on. So in that light, are there any questions or comments from members of the governing body? There's obviously a lot to digest. I know many of you will have seen various parts of this before. Certainly as chairs, we've been working with the senior management team of South West London on this in partnership together for quite a bit of time. So I'm confident that the chairs, both from myself, from Merton and the others, are cited on this and feel comfortable with where we're at. Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the paper. It was just a broad question, really, because we have seen this a number of times. And it was just to ask, when you read one version and read the next, it can be difficult to remember. Is there anything substantive in this one that's different from the others that we should highlight, or is it essentially what we've seen before I didn't see anything different.
No, there's nothing substantively
Yeah.
different. I think the main thing was that governing bodies haven't formally seen all of the programme structure
Yeah.
and all of the detail behind it. And actually, you know, in some governing bodies we've been asked, can we see that, to make sure there's assurance that we're doing all the things that we should be doing to make sure we're ready for the 1st of April. So that's what it's here for today. We also recognise governing bodies have a lot of experience of working as a CCG, and if we've missed anything or if there's anything that we think is a risk. So we had some discussions in Wandsworth this morning about logins for general practice, because apparently when CCGs came into place there was some kind of issue around the logins, and with the change moving from 6 to 1 and making sure that we've got all the processes in place to make sure that all of that happens. We have, which is really positive, but it's just that kind of previous knowledge that people have that they can bring to this.
It was only just to reflect on the bit about the staff, because obviously they're the ones that sort of concern me most through this process, has been the change that we had with Wandsworth and Merton merging, and then through this only a year or so later. That is, and I know the consultation summary will come at the end of January, so it'll probably be more relevant to the next governing body meeting, but it's really just weighing heavily on the mind the impact on staff with such a big change, and just any feedback in the interim of how they've taken it all.
So I'll start off and then James can talk specifically about Wandsworth and Merton. So actually we've been talking to staff for quite some time. We did a kind of pre-consultation engagement with the staff. So they were prepared that the changes that we put in place are happening, and we actually got a lot of feedback through that process before we went through the formal consultation process, which is now closed. And we've got some good feedback on that as well, and we're just going through that process now. But I think if James just talks, so I think the people are prepared for it is what I'm saying. But James, do you want to talk about one?
Yes, I mean, I'd say that all change is obviously unsettling, and you're right to highlight that a number of staff were consulted on a change to structures when we brought the Merton and Wandsworth management teams together in 2017. Notwithstanding that, I think that we have been talking about this for some time with staff. We have sought to recognise a number of the strengths that we have within the Merton and Wandsworth Place team already with what we've designed and put in place in future, and because we are keeping a Merton and Wandsworth team that has a lot of the same functions as the team has at the moment, while we need to wait for the end of January to be able to confirm the outcomes of the one-to-ones with people, actually what I'm anticipating is a substantial amount of slot-ins, so people who are a 70% match between their current job description and a new post, and they're the only 70% match, so they're not having to compete for their job. So it won't be every case, and there is substantial change for some functions, including finance and quality and corporate governance, so those functions do change substantially. But for our transformation and commissioning and primary care functions, I'm anticipating quite a high level of slot-ins, and certainly that's, I think, been reflected in the tone of the engagement with staff through the consultation process. Equally, we've had really good engagement, and people have flagged things that we are having another look at to make sure that we've got it absolutely right.
Dagmar, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect back on the quality bit, that for the collaboration with local authorities, particularly the safeguarding is a really important issue. And just double checking, we had papers around the South West London safeguarding arrangements previously here. It wasn't picked up under quality, but my assumption is that the South West London safeguarding and quality function will work hand in hand. Is that correct?
So you're absolutely right. The safeguarding function sits under quality. It is on a separate slide. We actually strengthen it because at the moment in Merton and Wandsworth we have a couple of joint posts. In the new way of working we should have more capacity because we have people in each of the areas. But the Safeguarding Partnership Board will... the partnership will still probably have the same representative, and you'll still have your designates and the same people in post. We haven't removed anything from safeguarding, we've enhanced it.
It's not really a question, it's more just a recognition of the patient and public voice within the governing body, and the fact that there'll be a lay rep and Health Watch and VCS present, so there's a real solid base for involvement of patients in the body.
So we've done a lot of discussion, I think, on patient public involvement. I think one of the I think we have a real opportunity actually to make sure we get this right, both at scale at South West London and at a local level. So we have got a South West London group, as you know. We are continuing to have patient engagement at a borough level and having the representation on the governing body. So, and even the discussion we had this morning was we will want to keep reviewing that to make sure we've got that right and make sure we're doing it in the right way. So I thank you for that. I think that's very positive.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it for comments. I'll take that as noted. I mean, obviously there's a huge amount of work gone on so far and still a lot more work to be done, so well done to you and the team.
Stakeholders reference for a meeting for months. Do they intend to have another one?
I'll take questions at the end, Sandra. Let's go on then to moving forward together the local governance part, James, which you're going to talk us through.
So I will note that many of these slides are familiar to the governing body from previous discussions. So I'll canter through them reasonably quickly and highlight things that you might not have seen before. On page 71 of the pack, which is page 5 of the presentation, the bullet points that are set out on that slide are taken from the terms of reference for the proposed Merton Borough Committee. And really what these just do is set out what we think a Borough Committee is there to do. So it's about really developing and delivering an annual plan, but doing that very much in partnership, and doing it in partnership with other health and care partners in Merton, and also doing it in partnership with Wandsworth, where there are a number of common interests across the two, particularly around St George's, but increasingly around some other areas where we've developed a partnership with Wandsworth over the last 3 years. Moving on to the next slide, and again this one will be familiar to the governing body. So this is really how we anticipate that partnership, that set of partnerships working in practice for a Merton Borough Committee. So you'll see on there that we do have a South West London CCG governing body in the middle of the top, and we have a Merton Borough Committee. But what we're anticipating with the Merton Borough Committee is that it will meet in common in 2 different places, and it will also be part of a meeting around St George's as well. So we already have a programme called Merton Health and Care Together. That's now a well-established health and care partnership programme based in the borough, and we are anticipating that we use the Merton Health and Care Together board to make as many of our strategic decisions as is practicable, so that we are making decisions as a health and care system rather than as a borough committee of a CCG in isolation. And that includes the development and delivery of the local health and care plan, which we already have, and also major investment decisions about borough-based services. However, we know that from all the work we do at the moment, we remain the stewards of £250 million of public money, and many of the detailed arrangements around the commissioning of borough-based services wouldn't actually be suitable to work through in a partnership meeting, and so that is why we're proposing to have the Merton and Wandsworth borough-based committees in common with Wandsworth, and that will allow us to discharge some of the borough committee's arrangements around details of procurement, specifications, contracts, etc., and also the upward reporting to the South West London CCG governing body, which will be a really important part of the transparency and accountability framework for the borough committee. Additionally, St George's is also referenced on the slide, and Merton and Wandsworth together have a responsibility for providing the CCG leadership in respect of St George's, and so I'm happy to say that in December our St George's Provider Partnership Board met for the first time, and this is the meeting that we hope will evolve to where the leadership of the borough committees from Merton and Wandsworth will work together with the executive team from St George's to make sure that there's alignment between borough level plans and the acute sector in St George's, and to make sure that we are delivering on acute transformation plans in St George's to the best of our ability as a system, because increasingly one of the key changes that is this is based on is that we will be held to account as a system rather than as separate CCGs and providers. So just moving on to the next slide, which is the proposed borough committee memberships. These are roughly the same for Merton and Wandsworth, and we've done that well, for simplicity's sake and to make sure that we are able to work together where it's the right thing to do. So the voting membership of the Merton Borough Committee will be the clinical chair, the deputy clinical chair, which is a post that can be held concurrently with a locality lead role, 2 locality leads, and the locality director. So that's the senior management post on the borough committee. We will then have non-voting attendees who will be a PPI lay representative, and I'll talk about that post in a moment. Clinical leads, the senior place team, and also representatives of other bodies who may be invited at the discretion of the chair. The quoracy is quite important to note, because this is the quoracy that applies irrespective of who the borough committee is meeting with. So whether it's meeting with its Wandsworth colleagues or with its Merton Health and Care Together colleagues, the quoracy is the same, and that quoracy is the chair or the deputy, the locality director or a deputy, and a second voting GP member. So this means that there will always be a clinical majority when the borough committee is making decisions about borough-based services, and that's been something that we've been felt is really important to safeguard as we set up this borough committee membership. Talking about patient and public involvement in a specific Merton context, we have worked really hard over the last 3 years to strengthen public and patient involvement in Merton. It's involved strengthening the patient engagement group and really making sure that we've embedded it as much as is practicable into all of our transformation processes. So we're going to maintain the current patient engagement group, and we intend to appoint an independent representative for PPI. So this will be a layperson who will chair the PEG, because we have lay chairmanship of the PEG at the moment via our lay member for PPI, and will attend the borough committee in a non-voting capacity. And this is really to make sure that we retain that really strong independent leadership of the patient engagement group, and we retain that really strong input to link between our PPI structure and process and our transformation work. We're also retaining the PPI team for Merton and Wandsworth as part of the local place-based team, and the PPI manager will report to the locality director in the new structure. So what this really, this is really about our local context. It's not the same for every borough. So some boroughs are doing this differently, but we felt that in our local context, this would be what would allow us to maintain continuity with the strengths of our current ways of working around PPI. In terms of implementation, which is the final slide in the pack, I've already talked about the HR process. So the consultation concluded on the 23rd of January of December, and we will be confirming slot-ins at the end of January. The other implementation tasks for the borough committee, there's some listed on the slide which are relatively straightforward. I think the one that I should just draw the governing body's attention to is that clearly Andrew Murray has been nominated as the chair designate of the South West London CCG, and the chair of the South West London CCG and the borough committee chair roles are not held concurrently, which means that we anticipate from the 1st of April needing a borough committee chair. In other boroughs, the borough committee chair is going to be the current CCG chair. In Merton, it will be somebody different. So applications were open to the GP membership during December. They closed on the 27th of December, and we will be undertaking an interview followed by an election process during January, the details of which have been advised to the membership. So shouldn't say anything more about that at this stage because that process is underway, but worth noting to the governing body at this point. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, James. So this is for discussion, this paper. So I'll open it up to the board. Any questions or comments on what James has presented? It shouldn't be unfamiliar to you because I know you've seen previous iterations and it hasn't massively changed since then, but it's quite a helpful update of where we're at in the process. Sarah?
So
I think it is worth highlighting again from your previous comment the slide on the patient and public involvement and the fact that we will need to make sure that there's real strength in how we engage locally at borough level and take that through into everything that we do. So I just thought it was worth just highlighting that, and if there was anything specific that you had to say on that you wanted to.
No, I think I'm really pleased to see that because from my perspective, and I think from the CCG's perspective, the two things that really stand out about the work of the CCG over the years has been the clinical involvement and the patient and public involvement. So I'm really, really thrilled to see that that is continuing in that depth on the borough committee. So good for the future. Thank you.
And just on that, I know we've got to work it through in terms of representation on Merton Health and Care together. I mean, I think in many ways there would be strength in having our PPI person on in that forum, but I know that's got to be worked through just to get the right representation in that in the board.
Yeah, I think what I would say about that is that we think there's a further discussion to be had with Healthwatch. I think that Healthwatch have got a lot of ground to cover between the Health and Wellbeing Board and MHCT, so it may be that an arrangement is reached between a PPI lay representative and ourselves and Healthwatch around that. Of course, our partners on MHCT have to be happy with that as well, and I'm aware that that person is a PPI lay representative for the Borough Committee of the CCG, so they perform a slightly different role to a Healthwatch rep, but we will continue to work that through, and it may be that we come to some pragmatic arrangement.
Good. Dagmar.
Yeah, I think in terms of strengthening or thinking about local accountability and lay member input, I am really pleased as well around the explicit relationship to the Health and Wellbeing Board, which obviously is statutory and it is public, and it is very much focused on the accountability towards the community. And so we are aligning Merton Health and Care together and the Health and Wellbeing Board. So to see those as really complementary and for me important for our public accountability.
Good. Thank you. So I'll take it that people are comfortable with that. And as I said, I know it's not the first time that you've seen it. So thank you very much for that, James. Let's go on then to item 4.3, which is emergency preparedness, resilience and response assurance. John.
Thank you, Andrew. A short paper today updating the governing body on the annual assurance process that CCGs and provider trusts go through each year in regard to emergency planning, resilience and response. Back in the summer, the CCG received a self-assessment template from NHS England, which we completed and showed our various relevant documents, the business continuity plan and our EPRR policy. That was then followed with a comprehensive visit from NHS England, NHS Improvement colleagues on the 24th of October to do a face-to-face assurance review of both our self-assessment and the various supporting documents. And I'm really pleased to say that Merton CCG and Wandsworth CCG, who were assessed together through this process, were fully compliant against all the core standards and also the deep dive standards, which this year were focused on extreme weather and climate change. There were a few minor recommendations which are in the process of being addressed, and those four minor recommendations are listed in the paper. The first one, which is relevant to the move to a single CCG model, is how we have lay member support for this important area of the CCG's business going forward, and the other three are relatively minor update actions that will progress over the next few months. But we're required to bring it for noting to the governing body, which is why the paper's here, but also I think to reflect the work of the team who deliver this service for us, and the move up one level of assurance from substantial, which is what we achieved last year, to fully compliant this year, which means that we achieved each of the 30 or 40 standards in total. 43 core standards and 19 deep dive standards. Each of those was fully compliant.
So John, just to say well done. So thank you to you and the team, because that's really great to see that improvement, to see that and we're fully assured around that, so that's really helpful. Thank you for that. This is for note, but I wonder whether anyone has any particular comments or questions on this particular report. I think we've noted it and congratulated you and the team, because a really good piece of work. Thank you. Good. So that takes us on then to the first item for decision on the governing body agenda, which is one we're hoping to approve, and that's the paper on transformation of community services. So John, back to you.
Thank you. So as you know, I'm covering the Director Commissioning role for a few months, and this is a piece of work that Josh Potter was leading until very recently. The reason it's here today is to update the governing body on the current status and to seek agreement on next steps. Some of you will be very familiar with this piece of work, others less so. So if I just briefly set the context, provide an update in terms of the phase that the project has reached currently. I'll briefly take you through the appendix, which is the full engagement document, and then ask for the governing body's view on proceeding with this work. But in terms of setting the context, first of all, as many of you will know, community health services span a very wide range of service offer, covering all age groups, and a whole variety of healthcare activities across numerous different settings. What Merton CCG is wishing to do is now look to commission those in a different way, principally to again shift the focus to ensure it's person-centred, prevention-focused, and further improves integration across both physical healthcare, mental health care and social care. We know over a number of years there's been formal and less formal attempts to address some of the barriers that exist between various forms of healthcare and social care, and this is another significant piece of work trying to dissolve those barriers where they still exist. So the paper sets out what this offers in terms of a vision and the proposed outcomes that the CCG is looking to deliver, but also leaves a significant degree of room for provider organisations to co-design with the CCG how this might be achieved. And the engagement document, which will be shared next week, it's in our public papers today, but will be shared next week at an engagement event with health and social care providers, patients and the wider public, is to look at the onward process and how we can form with those providers a fully integrated service that really does look to deliver the commitments in the long-term plan. Chapter 1 of the long-term plan is very much focused on this area of improved community health services, and deliver for Merton a service that takes the current community health provision and offers a fully holistic, integrated approach to service delivery. The appendix, the engagement document that's appended, sets this out in some detail, both in terms of the context of what we're trying to do, while also making clear we're not prescribing a service model. This really is a framework for further iteration, and it must be developed in collaboration with stakeholders. That really is the fundamental point of what we're trying to achieve. The document gives a great deal of background about the health needs of the borough, the strategic needs, and also the wider strategic direction in terms of principally the NHS long-term plan and its focus on prevention and integration, and the need to ensure that any duplication is reduced and divides, as I've said, where they still exist, are addressed. It's very much an outcome-focused piece of work. So again, the engagement document sets out the outcomes we're seeking to deliver, and it breaks them down across 6 domains. So it begins with that person and patient focus, and then picks up the domains that we've been looking at for some time in South West London of start well, live well and age well, and then also looks at a system focus, so in terms of the sustainability, reducing variation, making sure it can achieve a financial balance, and also a bigger focus on prevention. In terms of a design principle, we're looking to extend things that work well. For example, we know social prescribing has benefited a whole number of patients, but we're looking to ensure that can be delivered at scale. And where Merton does have some very well-developed community assets, again, looking to further make good use of those assets as part of this new contract. In terms of the scope of the contract, it's the financial scope of it is just over 500,000 per year. And in terms of immediate next steps, we're looking to launch the engagement process, followed by then a formal NHS procurement process to work to contractualise this, and a long-term contract of somewhere up to 7 years to give the incoming provider a sufficient duration for them to co-design this model with us and then deliver the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And a single contractual mechanism to do this, to take away the burden and management resource that's needed to run a whole abundance of separate small-scale community contracts. Finally, in terms of timescale, we're looking to start the engagement phase formally from next week. That will run from early January out to March, and then working with a preferred bidder, selecting a preferred bidder first of all from April to June, and then working with them ahead of launching the new contract from April 2021. So, reason it's here for governing body discussion today is first of all to provide the updates that I've just run through, and then secondly seeking agreement to proceed with this provider engagement phase of the project.
Thank you, John. And obviously we've got the timeline at the end, which talks about the provider engagement phase, January to March. Maybe I missed it, but the actual activity taking place in the engagement phase, what are the different things that are going to be done as part of that 3-month period? So you've got an event next week, and what else do you expect to see happen in that period of time?
So the event next week is really sort of kick-starting the process, and I think as part of that, the project manager who's leading this piece of work, I think is going to be looking to support the various organisations that attend that event and show some interest in working with us on this project, to look at how we can look to get some sort of model of preferred provider. So there might be more than one preferred provider model, a collaboration of various organisations. And I think over those first few months, it's very much looking at what this outline specification requires and who those providers may be. So clearly there are some incumbent providers delivering community services for us. There are some perhaps who don't currently deliver in this part of London who may be interested. And it's looking at what sort of organisational form they may want to come together to work collaboratively in as this single source of community services for Merton going forward.
So, so what will the governing body's role be in that? So what will we see next as part of this process? So you're going to be making some decisions as you work through the provider engagement phase, coming to some sort of decision at the end of it. So what do we see next here in this setting?
So I think in terms of the timing, the next it will be the South West London CCG will then see the outcome of the procurement phase. James, I don't know if there was an intention to bring something sooner, but otherwise I think once we get to a procurement phase, then we revert to an update to the governing body.
Yeah, so I think we need to see how the engagement phase goes. I mean, I would certainly anticipate that we will be updating borough committees and, if necessary, a South West London CCG governing body on the outcome of the engagement and what we think that the route will be to secure a new contract on the basis of that. I think until we do this engagement work, I think it's not completely clear to me what decisions we might need either a borough committee or governing body in the future to take. I think what is clear is that the timing means that they will probably fall to the Merton Borough Committee and the South West London CCG governing body. But absolutely, we just need to be mindful of, informing the relevant committees and governing bodies nearest to the time and taking them through whatever decisions are needed based on what we find during the engagement. I think it's worth highlighting that this is engagement at the moment, and this is really to really test formally the response to this quite ambitious proposal that we have.
Okay, thank you. David, I can see that you had a question.
Thank you, James. I think that's helpful because again, I think my question was really on, I think it's page 16. It's how you move from the engagement phase into then the next phase, which we talk about procurement. Well, there's obviously varying ways to procure. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going through a full competitive tendering process. So I think that was helpful, because I did want to ask how we would carry out that bit. It's the fourth box, which talks about the capability assessment. So assuming there are a number of providers who are interested, I don't think we need to go through it now, but there does need to be quite a formal, structured process to identify the capability of those providers, particularly if you then go into a further phase of procurement and obviously trying to avoid any sort of challenge. So that was my particular issue. So I think you covered that. Just the second one was then, it's partly around the timetable, but it's also the sort of the ask of the providers, because it's quite a timetable to go from engagement phase into the next phase, and a sense of, if you're looking for providers to come together, whether it's in an alliance or something else, that does suggest that the providers have got to do a lot of work as a group of providers in order to be able to respond to what you want as commissioners. And my question therefore is there enough time within this? And I suppose, how critical is that end date of April 21 really?
It may be helpful for me to take this one, because I think I've probably been involved for a bit longer. We have signalled an intention to do this for some time, and equally, based on some of our early, shall we say, pre-engagement on it, that's why we've put the capability framework in as something else that we're engaging on. So what we're not saying is we expect a fully mature provider alliance to be in place to take the full scope of this contract in April 2021. We propose that both the phasing of services coming into this arrangement and also the extent to which we expect providers to work via an alliance rather than via separate contracts would both be phased. Because what we recognise is we're looking to build a long-term partnership here, and actually that doesn't require everything to be big bang by April 2021. The technical need that we have is that we have a substantial contract expiring in April 2021 that has no facility to extend. So therefore we have to go through a process to secure a successor contract, because that's vital for service continuity. What we are looking to do is to not just basically issue the same again, is actually to use that opportunity to start building a new way of working. But within this engagement is to say, look, this is our thoughts about how we should do this. We are now talking to other people on a more formal basis about whether we've got the phasing right in terms of both how an alliance would form and also what services would go into that alliance arrangement.
Let me ask one more question then, which is around the phasing. Are there any risks associated with the phasing depending on which providers end up being considered to be most capable? So is it straightforward to, because you're going to continue with some existing, if you're phasing it, you're going to continue with some existing providers providing elements of services, but with new arrangements for those that you've chosen to go into phase one? And are there any risks in terms of who we get to do the phase one provision if they're a different provider from the incumbent, for example?
So,
am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So my hope is that what we see is an alliance or numerous alliances forming that would ultimately be able to take on the whole scope of the contract. And if that isn't reasonable, then I think we would say we've got the scope wrong. What it might mean is that some alliance partners are a more or less active partner in the early phases. So the experience of other places that have been through a similar process of building a provider alliance is that you may find that the most active partners are, say, your community services provider and one other body in the first instance. There are other parties who are at the table, but they take a less active role in the first couple of years because they're not in a place to do it, but then they actually start to build out from there. So I think that this is our view at the moment about the way this is likely to evolve based on those experiences and based on our local market in Merton. But of course, this is one of the things that we need to explore during this engagement phase.
So would you just be allocating contracts without any oversight?
I'm gonna take all the questions from the public at the end. So keep a note of that, and we will come back to you on that. Karen.
Can I just raise a slight concern about capacity in relation to primary care? I mean, obviously I understand the necessity of any provider demonstrating their capability to hold a contract, or be part of a contract. But looking at the proposed document is obviously quite comprehensive. And I'm just concerned, given that our primary care networks are also mobilising some of the new primary care specifications as well, that the ask might be quite a big one to be able to play their full role in this, which hopefully primary care will be expecting to do, plus mobilise those new network specifications. And I would just be slightly concerned that while obviously you need all the proper documentation, particularly if there's a challenge, that some larger organisations would actually have an advantage in that they perhaps already have the machinery, I want to use that word, to actually generate the answers to a lot of these questions much more easily than primary care may do.
I think it's a fair point. I think the amount of resource available to support this will be different. I think across emergent alliances, people will take a view about where they source their project resource from and how much they can put forward. But I take your point, it will be different.
Mohan?
Yeah, I just wanted to have a sort of statement really, or comment. So it really does sort of reflect and align with the personalised care plan, which is the 5-year, one of the 5 priority areas. And I think we should be doing this. This is what community services should be doing and should be providing. And I actually think we're quite fortunate in Merton to be kind of having a lot of the resources in place already, certainly in primary care. I look at social prescribing, I look at expert patient programme, and look at shared decision making. I think we've got those elements already, and I think community services is actually where our resource is. So I think I'd welcome this in terms of the forward vision. How we make it work, I think we need to work our way through, but this is certainly what the vision is.
I certainly just, my view, Karen, on your comments is, I think that is precisely why we're embarking on an engagement phase. We have made efforts to cite the primary care community in Merton on looking at this direction of travel already, particularly via the existing GP Federation and their involvement with Merton Health and Care Together, which has clearly been a very strong link for this. And a lot of this really is about providing a contractual framework to implement the plans that are developed by Merton Health and Care Together. So I think that it is absolutely a valid point. I think what we need to be really clear about is that there's every opportunity for local primary care to engage and for this to be supportive of the sustainability and development of locally based primary care. It's about how we do that, and it's the balance between doing that but also not passing up the opportunity to integrate services offered in primary care with community and wider mental health and social care and preventative services, because that's really what this is aimed at doing.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. It was just a slight change of tack, because looking at the timelines on page 19, when it talks about selection of the preferred provider, that will just be at the start of the new South West London CCG and the Merton Borough Committee. So will this process report to the Merton Borough Committee or make those decisions? How would that work? Will be a live example for the new system?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So a lot of the operational decisions if you like, will go through Merton Borough Committee. It will depend on the final scheme of delegation, but I think I'm almost certain really that any final contract award would go to the South West London CCG governing body because of the size of any ultimate contract award. So I think that there will be, if anything, and by the way, on the way, I think it will go through a South West London CCG Finance Committee as well, again, because of the size of the award. So I think that there will be a substantial amount of scrutiny, both in terms of local, clinical and managerial input, and then also in terms of corporate finance oversight, and then in terms of public corporate oversight as well.
Well, I think that's probably going to be quite a helpful thing to look at is, as you move through the engagement phase, starting to become clear about what you're going to be bringing where, when, and particularly then having the opportunity to scrutinise the decisions around preferred provider and the process you're going to go through to do that. I think it's going to need to have appropriate scrutiny, and I guess the sooner then, as we go through the engagement phase, you can map that out, the better probably.
I am also, I think it is worth saying, I am also aware it's quite a fluid policy environment in terms of this sort of area as well. So I think that's why we're remaining as open-minded as we can around exactly what that would look like.
Good. Marek.
Thank you. I just wanted to harken back a little bit to what Karen was saying earlier as well, and of course in the context of the newly published draft PCN days and how that may impact upon the decisions that are being made. So you mentioned, used the word fluid, and I think it is extremely fluid. And on the one hand, that's of course an opportunity to try to make sure that what does come through the community services programme in the future is actually really well tailored to purpose. But it does, from my aspect as an LMC representative and looking after the interests of my membership, it's just to try to make sure that the sustainability and stability of general practice is actually upheld. So there may well be change that comes. I'm sure that there will be. I'm very glad to be able to say that the LMC has been involved in this because we've been taking part in the conversations already at the primary care ops group, and this will of course carry on as an item of discussion and interest, but it'll be very important to make sure that we don't disrupt general practice in a way that causes significant problems.
And to be absolutely clear, there's absolutely no intention to do that. I think there is an opportunity to ensure wider access to some of the things that are done in general practice at the moment, and more equitable access. And there may well be opportunities to support primary care in providing some of the services where, there is some variability at the moment, but I think it has to be done in a way that's sustainable. And I mean, just to reference the fact that we have just seen the PCN DES specifications in draft very recently, and without having looked through them in detail, they do potentially have implications for this process, and that is one of the moving parts that we're having to deal with. I think for me, my focus will be on using this as a mechanism by which we can do the right thing for people in Merton. That is the overriding aim here, and if we can all agree as partners a structure that allows us to do that, then in a way I think that gives us more ability to handle flexibly some of those things that sort of come down at us really. This is about us creating the right framework for services in the borough.
Okay, so we're being asked to agree the recommendation to proceed to the provider engagement phase of the project. And what I've heard is a number of comments really just wanting to understand a little bit further what that's going to involve and making sure then we've got appropriate reports back and that the relevant committee is then involved in scrutiny and decision making in the process. But I think subject to that, it sounds like the board are going to be happy to approve that recommendation. Is that correct? Yep, so we're happy to approve. Good, so that is approved. So let's go on to the next item for approval, which is Sutton and Merton Charitable Funds proposal. And Neil, you're going to talk us through that, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so the proposal has been brought here for the governing body to approve the future use of the charitable funds across Sutton and Merton. So currently Sutton CCG host this function and report it all through their books, but Merton is an active member of the Charitable Funds Committee, where approvals are given to local organisations who bid against the fund. We looked earlier on this year at, to look at the review of the current management arrangements for the fund and look at the various options which are set out in the paper. And these were presented at the committee back in August, and we then took those away to the respective CCGs for further comment and therefore a recommended option. This came to the Merton Finance Committee in December, and the preferred option that's actually been agreed at both finance committees was to place the fund with the two respective voluntary service councils in each of the boroughs. I think there's some agreement in terms of the split of the fund at the moment, so I think there's a number, but I believe that's moved on, and we think we've now got agreement with the percentage split across the two boroughs. So, so subject to approval being given here, this will be enacted immediately with completion by no later than the end of March and hopefully sooner than that. I'm not sure whether Claire or David wants to say anything more about the process.
Yes, thank you, Neil. So I chair the committee on behalf of both CCGs. So the proposal in here now is that the figures were quoted as 70%, 30%. It's actually, we've agreed it earlier today, it would be 65% Sutton, 35% Merton. That's slightly more for Merton. It is a substantial amount of money. So in terms of governance, what we're suggesting for the future is that the oversight should come through the Borough Committee and particularly through the local managing director. So we've already, there's a list of criteria that we've agreed with both voluntary services councils, so we've got that for Merton. But given it is a substantial money, what I've said to James Blythe earlier is that it really would be helpful for him to sit down now with the chief exec of the organisation in Merton, effectively to agree now what the criteria are in terms of how they should be operated, because that's the way the governance ought to be, and then there should be some reporting back in future through the governing committee, through the Borough Committee. Part of the issue for doing it this way was, I think board members will remember, that money's been sitting there for some years and we've been spending the interest, but actually a lot of the grants, because we've capped the grants at a sort of maximum of 10,000, there's very little that local organisations can do with those grants. So what we are saying, there's an opportunity there now working with the voluntary services to really get that money and to use it to get some injection into various projects locally, and that's the piece that needs to be taken forward.
Claire, did you want to say something?
I was just going to add that the local voluntary service councils have a grant-making side, so they will be using that money to support local community groups across the borough, and it will give much more flexibility to them to be able to give reasonable size grants where they're deemed sensible.
James, go on.
So this is something that I've advocated for some time. We have put social prescribing, as an example, at the centre of our policy and strategy for health and care, development of health and care in Merton. We know that to support people with complex needs, that we need the support of the local voluntary sector. However, the local voluntary sector, as in many places, has been under enormous pressure for a number of years. And as social prescribing and other ways of integrating the local voluntary sector and local community services into the health and care system continue to develop, that we cannot continue to simply rely on those organisations to just do more with the same, particularly when they're under pressure in terms of the grants and other sources of funding that they're receiving. So we have an opportunity, particularly working with MVSC, who are so central to our existing social prescribing offer, to use this funding to both support service provision, but also to build capacity and capability. within the sector. We only get one shot at it. It is a fixed sum of money, so we need to make sure that it's used judiciously and well, and that we secure long-term value from it that is of benefit to, first and foremost, to people living in Merton, but also to the voluntary sector and also to health and care services. But I think there is a huge opportunity within this to say, actually, let's really maximise the use of these funds, and let's make it clear to our local voluntary and community sector partners that schemes like social prescribing are not a one-way street. They're not us asking them to fill in the gap and to do more with some of our more complex people, but also we are prepared to find ways to support them to do that.
I know, Sarah, you've got a comment, but let me just ask something specifically relating to that, James, because there was something about the wording of spend out, and I think you kind of touched on this, the idea of using the funding to create sustainable capacity in the voluntary sector, rather than spending it out through one-off grants that will be time limited and will set expectations of ongoing funding without necessarily an agreed route for that happening. So how are we going to get that right? Because ideally you would use the money to build sustainable capacity and strengthen these organisations and help them with their fundraising activity so they became sustainable in their own right. And how much are we able to prescribe that in terms of what we do and also within the terms of the requirements set on the funds?
So it is absolutely between us and MVSC really to determine that in terms of how that's done. The grant agreement as set out is reasonably open about it, but it does require MVSC to agree with us exactly the criteria that we use and how that will be done. I think that the point you make is a very good one, so I think that we would need to be very cautious if we thought it was the right thing to do to fund service provision that would require recurrent funding from spending out. We have funded service provision from the interest rather than the capital in the past, and I think that's appropriate. I think the opportunity here is to build capacity and capability. There may be a few things that we choose to pump prime in a very explicit way, so we say, actually, we think something will have a substantial return, we're then therefore going to fund it for a specific period of time to see whether that is the case. And actually, the experience that we've built up of evaluation of schemes through the evaluation we've had of social prescribing in East Merton means that we do actually have a track record of doing that quite successfully and then making the recurrent funding case to follow based on what we've had in terms of a non-recurrent funding source. So we have the opportunity to absolutely set that out with MVSC. I think we need to be judicious, and I don't think we should use this as a sort of short-term sticking plaster, but equally it gives us a bit of headroom to make the right decisions in a more strategic way.
Thanks, James. And I've got comments from a number of people. I'll come to you first, Sarah, and then I'll go round.
So just that I'm really pleased to see this. I think it was a bit of an anomaly, really. CCGs holding charitable funds, that wasn't actually the intent, I think, originally. So CCGs don't generally hold charitable funds. What that means is they don't then have the capacity, the resource or the ability to be able to spend them in an appropriate way. So I'm really pleased that we've come to an agreement in the way in which we can do this so that we can make sure those charitable funds go to the right place and they are spent in the right way. And I think that's really, really positive. So I just wanted to thank everyone for their work in doing that.
Thank you, Sarah. So let's come to you, Mohan, our clinical lead for social prescribing. I'm sure you've got some views on this.
Yeah, I'd just say perfect timing. I think we've got it a great time. We've just ramped up the number of social prescribers in Merton from 3 to 9 as of the next couple of weeks. And so that's going to have a huge impact in terms of the resource we need for our community. And so if we can support that, and I agree, it shouldn't just be about service delivery. But we do have a new tool coming in, the Elemental tool, which is going to be tracking these cases, and that will really show where the demand and where the impact is happening, and so that will allow us to build for future years. And I think with the 5 long-term plan, with prevention being the root cause of it, we actually need to sort of make sure that we bolster up our community service, otherwise, or community voluntary sector, otherwise we're not going to have a service to refer into. So I really sort of applaud this, and I think we've got the right team in at the moment as well. I think the new chief exec and the new operating manager is perfect. So I think this bodes very well. So I'm really pleased. Just one question I did have. Sutton, do they have a natural Merton voluntary service council? Because I know they do. They do have an overarching one.
Dagmar?
So I also absolutely applaud it. It fits to the previous discussion we had on integrated community model. The voluntary sector is an absolutely crucial partner. I was just curious, maybe I've just overlooked it. How much are we talking about? Sorry for a rather mundane question. But we were all sort of getting all sort of really, really excited, so I thought it's legit to ask.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I mean, I'm happy to.
I think it is subject to the final account, but I prefer not to quote a figure now if I can.
Right. Just scale-wise, are we talking, you know?
Oh, it's hundreds of thousands.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it's not just a small amount of money.
Right. Okay. All right. That's fair enough.
Claire?
I just wanted to flag up that making sure that the funds are used for sustainability is the ideal, absolutely. But there will also be some levels of service provision, certainly from social prescribing, where the organisations are already having to use their own resources to provide those services. So I think there's probably going to need to be a little bit of a mix, a bit of flexibility there.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fine where that we consider those cases where we have the opportunity to then say, let's track, as Mohan says, through the elemental system, what the subsequent impact is on utilisation of other services. What we know about social prescribing in general is that it is changing the pattern of utilisation of certain patients at general practice. It's also changing the pattern of presentation in A&E. I think we could also possibly track and see how it's changing the pattern of presentation to mental health crisis services for some people as well. So if we can use it to make the case, then absolutely these become very easy business cases to make in the future, and that's where I'm keen to make sure that if we do make those investments that it's on that basis, because otherwise it will go quite quickly.
So, it sounds like there's broad support for the proposed option, but bearing in mind that obviously there's some concern just to make sure that the way those funds are used is sustainable. Are we then happy as a committee to approve the recommended option on this? Is that yes? Good. So that is approved. So that takes us on to two standing items. The finance report from month 8. Neil, that's back to you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not going to go through the reports in detail, but take it as read. I think to note that we're still all on track for month 8, so there's no real changes from the previous month's forecast, but I think, as I probably continually say each time, that equally means that the pressures have not really gone away either. So it's all the same areas, nothing new has cropped up. It's mainly around acute services, prescribing, mental health and continuing healthcare. I think in terms of the risk going forward, you can see from the risk and mitigation table now that we've moved a lot of the risk now over into the position itself, and it's really around acute is where most of our concern is. As things stand at the moment, we have a recovery plan in place. Some of it has delivered, some of it still needs to be delivered, and we are scrutinising that continually and through the Finance Committee as well. One final point is around GP at hand. So we have now received notification for month 9. So at the time of this report, it was just as a notification, but just to say that now has come through. That is based on activity in 18-19. It's slightly less than what we were told previously, but also to know that it will be updated for registrations that are going through in quarters 1 to 3. So I think there's January and February they're planning to do some further adjustments around that. So for Merton, it's around, well, it's just shy of 300,000 is the adjustment. So I would just like the board to note the position. Obviously, this is a fairly brief update, but please don't take that as I'm understating the position or the challenge that we've got. It's significant and it's certainly not eased up at the moment, but we're still on plan to achieve our target. Happy to pick up any questions.
Thank you, Neil. I don't know if there's anything that David and James want to add to that. You don't have to, but I'll open it up to you.
Yeah, as we're continuing to scrutinise, as Neil says, through the finance committees. Again, I think just helpful, just noting that the two issues, aren't there? One is around making sure that we keep on top of the risks in terms of this financial year, and there are some risks in here that Neil has identified. But then, of course, the ongoing issue going forward, and I think, you know, clearly as we start to now formalise the contracts and the budgets for next year, that's going to be the bigger issue for Merton in terms of being able to keep on top of the ongoing position here, because clearly a number of these risks are not just one-offs, they're recurrent. So I think it's that position. I know Neil and the team know about it, but I think it's worth the board just again noting that that's the risk going forward.
Any questions on this? No, so that's for noting. Thank you very much, Neil. That's noted. Let's go on then to the performance report. Sean.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'll take us through the report. I'll take it that it's been read and then put out any key issues or points of note. So the report starts on page 136. It shows the latest month 7 data that Merton for IAPT is now compliant for the access rate, recovery rate and treatment waiting times, which is good news. For cancer, St George's are compliant for all of the 8 standards, but the CCG are not compliant on 2 of the 8. So the first one is GP referral to treatment within 62 days. And most of that focuses around Royal Marsden and Guy's and St Thomas's, and there's breach analysis and learning underway on that pathway. And the CCG is also not compliant on subsequent treatment for surgery within 31 days. And it's a similar position with that, and that's being picked up by the South West London Cancer SLF Forum. For RTT, so St George's now are above their trajectory and also above the London average as well. And they've now received just over £500,000 as well for bariatric surgery. And that's going to be underway very shortly, which will ease then improve their position. Diagnostics, again, is not going to be compliant, so that's the issue there is mainly at St George's and around cardiac echoes, and that's essentially account for about a 3 to 4% drop in performance. They have provided an action plan and they're putting in significant additional admin and management resource and also looking to use external capacity to get themselves back on track. And depending on that external capacity, it looks it could be anything between 2 and 4 months for their recovery period. I'll spend a little bit more time on the A&E 4-hour standard at St George's. So their performance improved in October, but has subsequently gone down in November and December, and has been equally challenging moving into January as well. So they are below the operating plan trajectory that's set at the start of the financial year, and are also now below the wind trajectory as well. There has been an ESIST system-wide review of the whole urgent care pathway. I think it was fair to say that review found that a lot of the issues were internal to the Trust. The Trust have set up an internal recovery plan, which is chaired by the Chief Executive, and that reports into the Emergency Care Delivery Board, which is a system-wide forum. There were some issues for the CCGs to pick up, so some of that was around GP provision at the front door, as well as increasing AMPs for mental health patient assessments, and both of those are being worked through currently. The Trust took an action recovery plan to its board, where they're looking for a 5 to 7% improvement over the next 3 months, which was focused across 8 different work streams, but the main areas were around converting the CDU2 area into a rapid assessment zone, significantly changing their internal escalation within the ED, and a lot of that was around implementing the second additional stream in nurse much more quickly, and then an overhaul of their bed management process, which essentially moves the management process into more senior leadership and ownership earlier in that process as well. St George's were successful in securing winter funding across emergency care, so for escalation beds, some more GP provision on the Tooting site, and some rapid response nurses out in the community, which is positive news as well. In terms of the latest position, so the Christmas period generally was a challenging period, not so much Christmas Eve, Christmas Day and Boxing Day. I think it was probably fair to say that the attendances were probably a little bit less than what we planned for. But actually ambulance and conveyances were probably a little bit up than what we planned for as well. And I think the main contributors to their performance over the Christmas period was probably around staffing, the availability of staffing, And they also had a significantly high amount of beds closed for infection control. So at some points there was up to about 50, 60 beds, which is probably higher than we planned for as well. The other point I note was just to say that the UCC at QMH has now gone live. What that does is provide some additional GP capacity into the system, and also has the ability to move some of the ambulances that would have gone to the Tooting site to the QMH site and relieve some of the pressure there as well. I was just going to touch briefly on the Epsom St Helier position. So different to what's been seen at St George's, so they have seen an increase in activity and attendances and admissions. Their resus has been full now for the last few weeks, which again is slightly different to St George's. They have got escalation areas open now across 3 different wards. They've also been hit by infection control, but whereas St George's was mainly flu, the Epsom St Helier one has been a lot more neurovirus than flu, which is slightly different. Epsom St Helier have also had an ESIST view and recommendations, and they've got an action plan that they're implementing to address some of that. What they focused on is around implementing a couple of pilots at their front door. So the first one was around having just additional GPs to stream patients, as well as treating patients within their UTC. The GPs are actively streaming patients back to primary care, and I had a conversation with their yesterday, and they've managed to increase their numbers from streaming 2% of patients back to GP practices up to 6% since they've gone live with that, so that's really successful. And they've also got a pilot now where they've introduced a nurse navigator, which is similar to St George's model, where a nurse tries to navigate before the patients even get to the streaming process, which has had positive impact. And their UTC, since the implementation of those 2 pilots, is now up about 97%, which is incredibly good performance for those cohort of walk-in patients. That was probably what I was going to cover on urgent care. The only other point I wanted to raise was about the delayed transfers of care numbers for Merton. So the number has, the position for Merton has deteriorated for in September and October. So a lot of that increase is around days spent at CLCH. There's been lots of conversations about whether those days or the increase in those days has been real, whether it's been a reporting issue, and I think it's probably fair to say that it's probably a combination of both. So most of the days relate to the Heathland unit, and we've had conversations with CLCH where it looks like there's been some issues around the data as reported, so patients were being captured as delayed when they wasn't actually medically fit. That data is going to be resubmitted, and we expect the number to come down, but there is also some key work that needs to be done about actually how we work operationally with CLCH and how we look to manage those patients out of the trust at the earliest opportunity, and then take any questions.
So any questions on the performance report? Tim?
It was just a statement of it was great to see the IAPT improvement steadily. It's much more obvious, having commented on that sort of in a slightly negative light for the last few governing body meetings. It was really good to see that's improving, and I think from a patient experience point of view, it seems to be getting more positive feedback from that, which is really good to see. So well done, John and the team for that one. And Dr. Otley.
Yeah. Well done. We've been working on that for some time, and it's good to see that improve. Yeah, really, really important to see that. Sean, you mentioned in relation to St George's and Epsom St Helier performance the impact of UTCs. Do we know what sort of volumes are going through there? And it sounds like their performance is very good. What's the activity levels like?
So for Epsom St Helier, they're just shy of 30% now of their walk-in patients going through UTC, which again is a significant improvement for them. St George's, the numbers are probably lower than that. It's probably closer to about the 20% mark, and a lot of the work, the recommendations of the ESIS work is about trying to get more patients going through the UTC element of the Tooting site, and some of the work they've done about redesigning the space and converting the CDU2 is to try to move some of those patients into, or increase the volume of patients that are going through the UTC. So it's about pulling patients back from majors and majors fit to sit back into the UTC and doing that much more quickly as well.
That's the percentage of walk-ins. It doesn't include GP referrals, 111 referrals.
Into the UTC?
Yeah.
So no, it would include, that'd be total.
Okay, any other questions? No? So that was for noting. Thank you very much, Sean. So we've got two sets of minutes on the agenda really just for information. So you've got the Finance Committee and Common minutes and the Integrated Governance and Quality Committee minutes. Are there any comments or questions relating to those? I'll take the Finance Committee and Common minutes first. No, it's just for, it was for information. And the Integrated Governance Quality Committee minutes? No, good. So I'll take those as noted. So that brings me on to section 7 of the...
Before you do that, can I just answer Claire's question from earlier, because I now have the answer to Claire's question. Yes. So, Claire, I have managed to get the answer to your question from earlier. So the electronic wizardry has helped me. So the leaflets will be delivered next week between the 13th and the 18th of January. So by the end of next week, everyone should have their leaflets.
Okay, thank you. So I will open it up now. Section 7 of the agenda, questions from the public. There are a few things that you'd flagged up as we went along, so I don't know where you would like us to start, but do you want me to pick up some of the questions that were flagged?
If you could let me ask the ones that I've got noted here, that would be good, please. You've just been talking about the A&E and the cancer referral numbers. Locally, the A&E figures are 79.4% when it should be 95%. The cancer referral to treatment is 75% when it should be, I think it was 85%. They're very low figures. Nationally, we have the worst figures for A&E wait times that we have ever had in the NHS. Do you really believe that removing 2 major acute hospitals from South West London will actually improve things for patients and stop people waiting these extraordinary amounts of time, waiting in corridors and dying before we go to news articles? Do you actually think your plans to reduce the number of acute hospitals, reduce the number of beds against the recommendations of the BMA and the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, reduce the number of beds and reduce the number of consultants? Do you really sincerely, as doctors, believe that that will improve anything for anyone? That's one of my questions. Question number 2, you say, do you think that it's reasonable to actually start the consultation today when most of the people in the area, according to the stalls that we hold regularly, most people in the area are totally unaware of your plans, and yet you're starting your consultation today? When are you going to put these leaflets through everyone's door? In particular, when you're intending to target special groups for your consultation, when they will have no prior knowledge of your plans, when you intend to phone people up, targeted phone calls, when most people will have no pre-knowledge of your plans. When do you actually intend to get these leaflets through everybody's door who will be affected by this? Because you've known these plans for months or years. You've no excuse for not having those leaflets ready to roll and be in everybody's door before your consultation. When do you intend to put those leaflets through everybody's door? And will you publish the details of all the meetings, the dates and the venues at the time, so that people can make plans to get to those meetings?
Okay, there's a number of parts to that.
Really? Have you balloted Merton GPs on your plans? If you have, what were the numbers of the result? And if you haven't, why not?
So there's a number of bits to that, a number of questions there, and there was another question here. Do you want to just give me that, and then we can work out how we answer them?
The question is actually about the local arrangements, the local borough arrangements, so it's not to do with Sheila's questions.
Local borough. Would you want to just flesh out what your question is, and then?
I think what I heard, and I know it was heard, was that the Merton Borough Committee is largely going to be working through the Merton Health and Care Board and the Merton and Wandsworth Committee in common. So my first question is, does that mean that the Borough Committee will still be meeting 6 times a year, as was set out in the terms of reference you kindly sent to me, as a Borough Committee itself? And secondly, it sounded a bit like it was going to be doing most of its work not as a Borough Committee. And secondly, our main interest is to do with the PPI lead, which we were very pleased to see, sitting on the Borough Committee. And if the work is largely carried out through these other forums, you mentioned having to have discussions about the PPI lead sitting on the Merton Health and Care Board, but would the PPI lead for Merton also sit on the Committee in Common? So it's about that transparency and that continuity
let's just take that one. Okay, I've clocked that. And there's another question there. If I just gather the different questions, then we can see.
I want to ask a question about the management of charitable funds.
Charitable funds, okay. What's the question about charitable funds?
It's to do with the legal responsibility of trustees.
Legal responsibility of trustees, okay. Maybe so we can come to that maybe after we've dealt with those other ones. James, do you want to just answer the local borough arrangements question first? Because I think that's probably...
so we do anticipate that the formal meetings of the borough committee will be the meetings that take place either as part of MHCT or as part of the committee in common. So they're not separate to those minimum 6 meetings a year. They constitute one and the same thing. So we don't anticipate that the Merton Borough Committee is going to meet on its own, because actually we think it should either be meeting with Wandsworth, or we think it should be meeting through MHCT. The 6 meetings a year is an absolute minimum. Actually, we had a discussion about this in Wandsworth this morning, and we think that realistically the Borough Committee will be meeting at least monthly through one or other of those forums, but that's something that we've still got to work through. We put the 6 in as this is the minimum that it would meet, but it's very likely to meet more. We anticipate that the PPOLA representative, the main place that they will be in the room with the Borough Committee will be in the Borough Committees in common between Merton and Wandsworth, and there will be one for Merton and there will be one for Wandsworth in the room. So that's what we anticipate. Does that answer all of your questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me pick up then the questions around improving healthcare together in Epsom St Helier, and I'll give it a start, and then there may be other people who want to chip in. Obviously I think the first part of the question was to do with A&E performance, bed reductions. How credible are the plans that we are consulting on, and how credible are our plans to invest the £500 million that has been guaranteed to us in really improving the quality of care for our patients. So as a GP chair of Merton CCG, I've been involved in the clinical advisory group that we have set up over the last 2 years. So I've been working with other GPs from across Sutton, Merton and Surrey Downs, and with clinicians from Epsom St Helier, including doctors, nurses and other health professionals. And we've been looking at the challenges that Epsom St Helier face. A&E performance is one of them. One of the critical issues that obviously Epsom St Helier have identified over the last 20 years has been the consultant numbers, and the issue of having adequate consultant numbers around emergency medicine, emergency surgery and A&E to meet the clinical standards. And that's something we've been considering, and we've looked at a lot of different options, and we believe the clinical model that we've come up with will help address some of those challenges. The reason being that the clinical standards relate to particularly the availability of consultants and consultant presence right through the week. What we know is when you have numbers of consultants that meet these national clinical standards, the quality of care for patients goes up. And the reason the quality of care for patients goes up is that they get early input from a senior clinician that allows better decisions to be made, quicker decisions to be made, so that the patients can be managed better. And we also know that when you meet the clinical standards, that evidence has shown us that the outcomes improve for patients. What we're looking at in the proposals is 2 key parts really, and hopefully we started to spell this out in our deliberations on Monday when we looked at the pre-consultation business case. We've got £500 million, about £80 million of that is going to be invested in both the Epsom and St Helier sites, where we're keeping 85% of services. And what we're going to put in place on both the Epsom and St Helier sites is a 24/7 urgent treatment centre. Now, we know quite a bit of the activity that currently goes through A&Es can be dealt with better in an urgent treatment centre. So what we know is that if we can get those operating 24/7, we will take some of the load off off A&Es. The other part of the proposal is to build a state-of-the-art emergency care hospital on either the Epsom site, the St Helier site, or the Sutton site, and that will be bringing all the specialist teams for emergency care together on one site. That will cover emergency medicine, A&E, emergency surgery, amongst other services. So that is the way that we know then we can meet the clinical standards. By having consultants on a single rota, we know that we'll get the consultant numbers up to the level that will meet the clinical standards. That will improve A&E performance for the reasons I set out, which is earlier decisions on patients and better decision on patients to get them to get decisions made, to either get them out of the A&E department, admitted into the hospital, or to be able to deal with them and get them home quicker. The other key issue that Epsom St Helier are facing at the moment is infection control. And one of the issues they're facing is because they don't have enough separate beds to be able to put patients in when they have an infection to prevent the spread of infection. So the whole point about building a specialist emergency care hospital is not only are we keeping the number of beds the same, in fact we're increasing the number of beds overall by 4. We will be providing better beds in that there will be more isolation beds, which will actually help with issues like infection control. What that means is we will be able to get patients out of hospital quicker, which will improve flows out of A&E. I mean, the other part of the proposal in terms of the Epsom and St Helier sites, I mentioned the urgent treatment centres. We're also looking at district hospital beds on those sites, and those are beds for patients where their needs are around rehabilitation. So as soon as patients on the specialist emergency care hospital site no longer need the input of a specialist team and no longer need access to critical care, we'll be able to get them off onto either the Epsom or St Helier site, I mean, obviously that depends where the specialist emergency care hospital is, whether they have to move or not. But once they go into the district hospital beds, they will have a dedicated rehabilitation team focused on their care. And what we've seen when you look at the model that's already been implemented in Epsom is that that reduces the length of stay for some of our elderly patients by about a day. Now that gets people out of beds quicker, which means we can improve the flows through A&E. So I'm really confident that the clinical model we're setting out, which has been really thoroughly tested by our clinicians locally and also by the Clinical Senate of London and the South East, that these proposals are going to improve performance in our hospitals, but more specifically, they'll improve the outcomes for our patients. So hopefully that answers question 1.
Could I come back on that?
Sure.
Okay. We've been asking you continually about evidence that this will improve outcomes. Evidence suggests that urgent care centres should be next to, co-located with proper full A&E departments, and that there should be no confusion about where patients should go and who should take them where. Urgent care centres are fine if people can be directed to the right department. If they're in standalone hospitals, evidence shows that it's not so fine. You talk about infection control. Over-occupancy of beds causes infection. Researchers proved this, and your bed occupancy levels are way higher than they should be. You talk about improving the number of beds. In your own plans, you talk about putting up to 200 beds in other hospitals. That's not an increase in beds, that's a 200 cut-in beds. Thirdly, you're going to plan it. In your justification for this plan, there were complaints that patients were having to be moved from one part of St Helier, for instance, to another via the outdoors. You were talking about transferring patients in ambulances from one hospital after 2 or 3 days of acute care into another hospital. That's very bad for patients, and there is a lot of evidence to show, especially with the Marsden, that poor transfers of care is causing death. In particular in the Marsden, it caused death to lots of babies who, the report said, were dying in agony because the transfer of care and the follow-up of treatment was so poor, children were dying in agony. I think your plans are very questionable and your defence of them is very weak.
So again, there's a number of different issues there. The answers to a number of those challenges are set out in the full pre-consultation business case, but let me just try and cover a few of those as briefly as I can. On the issue of urgent treatment centres and co-location, obviously we've got 3 options that we're consulting with the public on. Two of those options, the Specialist Emergency Care Hospital at Epsom and the Specialist Emergency Care Hospital at St Helier, in those options you would have one of the two urgent treatment centres co-located with an A&E. In the third option, which is the Sutton as the Specialist Emergency Care Hospital, we would have 3 urgent treatment centres rather than 2, and one of those would be co-located with an A&E. The national specification for urgent treatment centres is based on evidence, and it does not specifically require co-location with an A&E. And there are reasons for that. What it does need is good coordination with a local A&E and support from an A&E consultant to the team running the UTC. Bed numbers, we're really clear that we are keeping bed numbers the same, in fact increasing by 4. Depending on which option we look at, we know that patients will choose. Some patients will choose to go to a different site, and that is what we're modelling. It's about patient choice and about making sure we have the beds in the right place to deal with the flows of patients as they choose to travel. We have looked in detail at inter-hospital transfers. We've worked with a number of with all the different providers in South West London and in Surrey, so with the different hospitals, to look at the impact of patients moving between hospitals. That does currently happen. Obviously, under this model, we will be doing it proactively, and the reason we'll be proactively moving patients is because we know that we can rehabilitate them better in a more focused way if they are in a unit where that is the core purpose of the unit, which is the district hospital model, and we are focusing the Specialist Emergency Care Hospital on providing critical care support for those patients who really need that level of care. And the reason for that is we know that it will improve outcomes for patients. I wonder if we should move on though to, because you raised the issue of consultation and the fact that people haven't had prior knowledge. Is that what are we doing going out to consultation when we've not shared information with patients? Well, the whole point of the consultation is sharing information with patients and the public. We had not formally agreed that we were happy to go out to consult on the pre-consultation business case until Monday, so we weren't in a position to share the information in the pre-consultation business case with the public until we'd made that decision. Having made that decision on Monday, we will now be, as of today, as we launch the consultation, sharing that information. The first job in the consultation is not only to give patients and the public access to that information, but actually to explain what it means and to explain the information, because there's a lot of stuff in the pre-consultation business case. Actually, most people, we need those who want to be able to scrutinise the detailed information, but actually people need it explained in a way that means something to them in a clear way, and that's the purpose of the consultation, why we'll be going out and doing public meetings, why we're making the information available on our website, and also in all sorts of different formats, so there's easy read versions and so on. Well, we've got a 12-week consultation process. There will be plenty of time for people not only to look at the information, but for them to engage with us and ask questions about the information so we can clarify it. We also want to hear if there are things we have overlooked as part of the evidence we've considered in coming up with the proposals. We want to know if there are particular groups where we haven't adequately thought about their needs in the proposals, and that's the point of some of the targeted work that we will be doing. We will, at the end of the 12-week period, bring all that together. We're also going to have a midpoint review in the consultation to make sure that everyone has had adequate opportunity to look at the information, and to make sure that the responses we're getting and the engagement work we've done has covered a fair representative sample of our population. And if that isn't the case at the midpoint review, we will adapt what we're going to do in the second part of the consultation to make sure we've got really good coverage.
The first people you consult with won't have had an opportunity to read and understand your proposals.
I think the issue here is about understanding of what we're doing in the consultation process. So we will be listening to what people say, but the first part is presenting the information to people so that they have a chance to digest it, understand the essence of the proposals, and then we'll be in a position to hear their response to that. So that's a normal sequential process in a public consultation.
You don't ask someone their opinion until you've told them what it is you're talking about.
We've had lots of opinions up to this point in time before we've even launched the consultation. Now people actually have the information on which to base an opinion, and so we are going to spend quite a bit of time and a number of different events and fora to explain that information to people so that they then have an opportunity to respond to the actual substance of the pre-consultation business case. And we think this process is really important. We've put a huge amount of time and energy into it. The whole process has been overseen by the Consultation Institute, and we've got credit from them for the proposals that we've put in place. So I'm confident the consultation plan is really solid. As I said, we're going to be doing a midpoint review, and if there's anything more that we need to be doing in the second part of the consultation, we will do that.
So when will those leaflets be dropping through the door of everybody in the area?
Sarah?
So that was the answer I gave to Claire just now. So next week, so between the 13th and the 18th of January, every home should have those leaflets. So by the end of next week, everyone will have the leaflets.
Because I never received any leaflet during your consultation before.
We haven't personally consulted, but what I would say to you is that if you do not receive it by the end of next week, could you please contact us and we will try and make sure that... Right, so I have got guarantees from the team that this will be rolled out across every household in the catchment area of the trust, and we've also extended that slightly into some areas because I know there was concerns about whether or not we had got the full catchment area, so it's actually been extended out. So that is going out between Monday and Saturday next week.
Your leaflets spell out to people that this sparkling new acute hospital, which we say will be smaller, fewer doctors and further away from most people, will your leaflet point out that this shiny new acute facility comes at the cost of 2 major acute hospitals that we currently have? Will you be telling people that?
Firstly, we're not closing any hospitals. Let's be absolutely clear about that. So we're not downgrading, we are changing the model of care for...
Let me just, I know Tim wants to come in on the previous one, but I think what we just have to keep reiterating is it's £500 million of investment in creating a sustainable future for Epsom St Helier hospitals. That's our priority, is a sustainable future for Epsom St Helier that will improve outcomes for patients, and that's what the proposals are all about. If there are pieces of evidence that we've overlooked, if there is information we haven't considered, that's the sort of thing we need to hear as part of the consultation process, and we will consider that. Tim, did you want to come in though? You had something to say.
It was only, I'm sorry to jump back a bit, but it was really about how patients use hospital, and just wondering if a narrative from us, obviously sitting on this side, knowing particularly about primary care, which is obviously my area of expertise, is the preventative and proactive work that is being funded, particularly within the primary care space and out of hospital space. And, the hope and the belief of the investments, the network, DES specifications around care home work, the CCG's care home DES is about, because I certainly know I have 5 nursing homes that we look after. That's a huge A&E burden coming from that cohort of elderly, frail patients. And the hope that we can give a much more standardised, proactive approach to help reduce those admissions. The same would go for palliative care patients who are stuck in hospital awaiting palliative care setups with our end-of-life team, part of CL. So there are a lot of aspects actually of primary care and community services working very hard to keep people out of hospitals. And the same way that surgical techniques have improved, that people need less days in hospital, which everyone is well aware of, that, I just wonder if there's a little bit of this narrative about the out-of-hospital space that would, particularly for patients and members of the public, to then see what we're doing, hopefully to reduce the number of people needing a hospital bed in the first place. And it's just a bit that I know we never hear or talk about as much. And it was just a bit of the narrative of the story of actually how some of these changes can be navigated and how patient care can be improved, but through somebody else.
I think that's right, Tim. Obviously, the conversation today has focused more on the hospital side of the proposals, but if you look at the pre-consultation business case and the consultation documents, you will see there is a section in there on out of hospital, because obviously it's entirely interrelated. I wonder if I might just pick up the question about Merton GPs because we need to finish at past, before we go on to the question about charitable funds. We have been talking to our Merton GPs throughout this process. Merton CCG is a membership organisation, and we have all our GP practices are members, and so any decisions we take as a governing body, as Merton CCG, are on behalf of our member practices. So with every decision we make, we do that in that representative role, and certainly for a decision like this, we've spent quite a lot of time talking to our member practices about this process as we've gone through it, and a number of our GPs have been involved either in the clinical advisory group or in the specific working groups that we've had around A&E, maternity, planned care, as part of the development of the clinical model. So I'm really confident they are fully sighted on the proposal and that they support it. Otherwise, we would not be taking the decisions we are as a governing body. Can I move us on to the charitable funds question? Because I'm conscious that we've got 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we cover all the questions. So what was the question specifically about charitable funds?
You still haven't, and we've been asking for it for years, provided any independent, peer-reviewed evidence to support your assertion that healthcare will be improved by reducing the number of places you can go to in an emergency for treatment. Not a shred of evidence has been offered, just assertions. Anyway, that's just a statement. Charitable funds. Is it more than one charity that generates this lump of charitable money you've been talking about controlling?
Do you want to answer that?
Do you want me to
Neil, go on. Maybe just explain where that fund comes from, so how it arose, and therefore what it's constituted of.
Yeah, so what it's constituted of is lots of donations that have happened over many years, going back probably to the days of the health authority.
Registered charities?
No, so this is a registered. So the charitable fund is a registered charity that gives the grant making of.
What's a registered charity?
Well, so the Sutton CCG receives the money and is the grant making authority, and all we're doing is we're transferring that.
So who are the trustees?
The trustee is Sutton CCG are the trustees, and they're in receipt of the donations.
So every member of Sutton CCG is a registered trustee of a charity?
No, Sutton CCG is the registered charity.
No, charities have to have named people. Trustees have personal, legal and financial responsibilities under charity law.
Yeah, so because I work for Merton.
We might need to go on.
Yeah,
David.
Sutton CCG is the corporate charity that holds this. It's Sutton CCG is the corporate. Yeah, the Sutton CCG is the board of Sutton CCG.
Who are the trustees?
Well, the members of the board.
Right, so they have personal, legal and financial responsibilities for the disbursement of that money. Are you aware of that?
Well, yes, I'm aware. I'm not sure what is the question?
Is that you can't just take money that's given for different purposes and treat it as a slush fund and disperse it in any way you would like.
That's not what we've said. The dispersal of funds has to be conducted in line with the terms on which the donations were made. Absolutely. And that's what you've set out in the document.
Yes.
There will be the conditions attached to the use of the funds going forward, because they were the terms on which they were given.
So they are restricted funds, and they are stipulated as to how.
Objects of the charity recorded?
So I am assuming through Sutton CCG.
Well, they'll be recorded with the Charity Commission because it's a charity.
There must be a document in your possession as Sutton CCG.
But we're not Sutton CCG. We're Merton CCG.
Those people who have responsibility as trustees, I've been told, are Sutton CCG board.
Correct.
Right. So those board members must be in possession of a list of the objects on which that money can legitimately be spent.
Correct.
And sent to prison for any breach of those requirements. Also,
correct.
For any failure to maintain the amount of those funds by wise investment in proper.
Well, all the terms that apply to the charity, they apply to Sutton CCG in their role, taking responsibility for these funds and the dispersal, and those are the terms on which the money is going to be used going forward. I'm sure Sutton CCG, who I mean, I can't really speak on behalf of them, but I'm sure they're taking their responsibilities very seriously and have taken appropriate advice on this. There's no intention to do anything with the money other than that that was intended when the donations were made in the first place. So that's one of the reasons why it's taken a long time to come up with a solution, because we need to make sure that we do honour the terms on which the donations were made. I think we've probably gone about as far as we can on that. I'm going to take one more question because we are pretty much out of time. There's two of you. Can you set out what your questions are?
Yeah, my question is this, right? You have £500,000, right, secured for bariatric surgery. I'm waiting to have bariatric surgery myself, right? I knew I went to the St George's on the 20th of November, and they said it's going to take up to 2 years for me to have surgery done. And I'm just wondering, is it going to be any quicker, or is it just going to be a 2-year timeline?
So I'm sorry to hear about what you've been experiencing. We can pick that up. It might be we need to just have a conversation after the meeting about your specific circumstances.
We'll get you details and we'll follow up directly with St George's. Yeah.
And then what was the question on the front row?
It hasn't come up today, but it was alluded to, and that's about the crisis recovery cafes. You've agreed for them to remain open until the end of March, but no decision was made. I work with Springfield with the trust on the setting up and so on of the two cafes, and obviously if you were going to close them, then you kind of out of time. It's just if you had any decision had been made on that.
Crisis.
So we will get back to you. I thought that we had, but I'm. Yeah. Okay. So on that basis, I'd rather get back to you than say anything definitive now. We'll take that away and check it, because I thought that we had, but. Well, we'll get them afterwards.
We'll get them straight after this. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to need to draw the meeting to a close. I've not been notified of any other business. So on that basis, I'm going to close the Part 1 meeting of Merton CCG governing body.